I would not give our panel justice were I to introduce each of them individually. So what I would like to do is I'd like for each of them to go through, introduce themselves, tell what they do, and tell why they think they're on this panel.
Okay.
How's that go? Yeah.
So great. We'll go. Okay. So my name's Jim Taylor, and I run the product management group for what is the Layer 7 business within Broadcom, formerly CA. And with a security group within Broadcom, we cover everything from identity and access, strong authentication, authorization, privileged access management, all the way to API security and API management. I believe why I'm on this panel is because I've got a really nice English accent. But it could be something to do with the fact that I've worked in the security industry for about 25 years now. I know I don't look it, but it's true. And I've worked for pretty much every vendor that there is out there. I started my early career with Novell, spent time with Symantec, Sun, Oracle. So I've had a lot of time to observe how security and how the industry, particularly how the vendors have changed. And obviously in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, we've seen dramatic change, around digitization, devices, the way that infrastructure has completely changed and upended. So my opportunity is to bring my perspective and the security view to the changing world.
Manny, welcome. Introduce yourself.
Oh, well, thank you. Manny Castillo. I'm the Senior Information Security Executive for the FBI. And my job is very simple. Is actually to define and implement security implementation, and that means procedures, the equipment for the FBI in order to protect the agency against cyber attacks. As you know, the FBI has 56 field officers. We also have about 356 smaller offices, and we have stuff all over the globe. Every embassy we have equipment, so you're talking a global attack surface. Why I think I'm on this panel? I've been doing this for over 20 years. I actually started doing cyber intrusions when I was a police officer, and that's how I got sucked into the FBI. Also, while doing information security for the FBI, I was also detailed over to the National Security Agency. And in my 20-year career, with the federal government, I have seen some of the most, I would say, famous, cyber intrusion that you see in the paper. Sony attack, Home Depot. You name anything that happened that was big, I had my hands somewhere in the kitchen for those things, either responding or doing some other directing. So my perspective is a little different because I've been on both sides of the equation, both defending, and then I was a director of operations for NSA, which is basically collecting for the information. So it's a little different how I see things. So I think that's why I'm here.
I'm Chip Mason. I'm in CA Technologies mainframe security product management area. I'm on this panel because I'm also named Chip. I think
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, but
and we're it. I think, yeah.
But my perspective here is around mainframe, and mainframe has been around obviously for a long time, and at least from security, it sets some of the best practices that other platforms in the meantime over the years have followed suit on. But the perspective is that there's been, for good reason, a lot of new best practices that have been adopted by some of these platforms other than mainframe. And we have done some things to actually bring those same kind of technologies and best practices to the mainframe. And so the perspective here is how can we actually improve security on the mainframe using some of these new things that have been done on distributed, as we call it, platforms, and show you how we can do that. So that's the perspective I have here.
So you can see we have a very qualified panel here, and that was in fact a trick question because I kind of knew that. So, Manny, I'd like to come back to you for just a second. I think it's fair to say that the FBI is can be viewed as being a Fortune 100 company. It's a very large enterprise, and this must be a particular challenge, especially since you've talked about your distributed nature, you've talked about big offices, small offices. How on earth do you approach the problem of trying to secure all that?
Not simple. It's a challenge, and I love challenges. So the way that I can frame it, you're going to have three things. When I'm looking at what is it that we need to do in order to protect the FBI from cyber attacks. I mean, I don't have to sell to my boss that people are after us. We have information that is valuable. So how do we do it? And for me, I like things that are simple, although I'm an engineer by trade. You got to have procedures in place. You got to have visibility, and you got to have awareness. So the first thing is you got to have some type of a cybersecurity strategy, whatever you want to call it. What is the plan of attack when somebody is attacking you? And within that, what is your cyber defense strategy? You got to have one. Because the last thing you need is, we need one because we were breached yesterday. So having that in place, and it's going to evolve over time based on, attack vectors, who is trying to get you, technology. So you got to have some type of a strategy in place to implement it. Then when it comes to awareness, what do you have actually that you need to protect? Pretty heavy on, I don't know if you ever heard about the critical security controls. And if you actually take the first three, do you know, like, who here knows 100% how many IT systems they have, like, right now? That's really pretty tough to do. The second thing is, what is it that the systems are running, software? And then if you look at the, the third control is, how are you securing that? What is it that you have? And when you look at it in totality, that's basically your attack surface. So if somebody who's been on the other side directing, the only thing I need is a little crack in order to go after a machine, right? So what you want to do is actually minimize the attack surface to the attacker. You don't want to make it easy. And I have seen through many of the years that a lot of the breaches that have occurred, either the machine wasn't patched, or they knew it wasn't patched, and they left it there for 30 days, and things happen. Shrink the attack surface. When it comes to visibility, data everywhere. Now we have AI, ML, all those things are great, but you really need to have really good visibility into your network. There is a gentleman, actually, he's all up at NSA. I don't know how many of you are actually familiar with Rob Joyce, but I used to work for him. And he talks about in a video, actually you can go up on YouTube, where he talks about, that NSA, TAO, where he used to work, Taylor Action Operation, and I used to work there. It's an NSA, they do C&E, right? Hacking, to collect foreign intelligence. And when you look at it from the perspective of somebody who's trained to do that their goal is to go and get information, like I said, you only need a little crack. And there's a saying that people say that you're looking for a needle in a haystack. And I was actually sitting at a class, I won't say who was doing it, and I said, actually, that is not correct. When you have a really sophisticated adversary, what you're actually looking for is a piece of weed in a haystack. Because one of the marks to me of somebody who's really advanced is their ability to stay inside your network for long periods of time. That's what, to me, separates somebody who can crack, grab your stuff, and get out, and somebody who can be there for months or years. So visibility is huge, because you really need to know what is happening in your network. The other thing is your procedures. So when you're talking about something bad happening, it's not if, it's when. What does your incident response plans look like? Does it get updated? What is it that you do? Do you rehearse? So all of this stuff, I call it a meat pie. People that work for me, we don't have a secret sauce. You have to really know what you have, because otherwise, how are you going to protect it, right? And then ingraining that, a cybersecurity culture where it goes from the top to the bottom, and everybody has, a job to do. So it's not an easy thing. It's not impossible to do, but you're constantly going back and forth between you and the attacker, and it's about quick detection and rapid response. You don't want anybody to be dwelling in your place for 3 months or 5, because then you really don't know what they did. So,
Chip, as he was describing that, one of the things that struck me is I come from a financial background. I started out in a financial background. And one of the things that was just sort of a bastion in itself was our mainframe, right? When we thought about this, I can remember from a security viewpoint, people saying, open systems, they leak like sieves, but man, these mainframes, they are just built to make sure they're just battleships from word go, and there's really nothing more we need to do to them, right? Would you Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, you know, mainframe is among the more secure platforms, but the bottom line is that behind the mainframe are the people that manage them and the policies they implement. If those aren't kept up to standards and modernized, then you know, the mainframe is not going to be any secure than any other platform. If you think about it, you know, between your data and the bad guy is 16 or fewer characters, right? 8 for your user ID and 8 for your password. That's kind of frightening these days. And in most platforms, Windows, Linux, whatever you have, you probably have longer than 8 characters, right? Very complex. You probably have 2-factor authentication. These things, there's some issues with that on the mainframe because of legacy applications, but you know, it is available. You can do 2-factor authentication. You do fast phrases. You can do, if you're a U.S. government employee, you have a PIV-CAT card. You can use those to access your mainframe. So all those things are available for you today and are actually fairly simplistic for you to implement if you just do it. So again, the mainframe, I think, is secure, but only as secure as your processes allow it to be.
So Jim, we sort of compared that, the mainframe, a little while ago to this open source environment. And I'll confess to you that I'll be the first one that when someone comes to me and says, this is a problem that we're trying to solve, I want to go out and cobble something together. And I've got a lot of tools in my chest these days, right? I can deploy bare metal, I can get operating systems for free, I can get applications for free, I can get virtualization for free, I can get containers for free. And after I put these things all together, people just start using them. Yep. And people will say, I want to have this as a proof of concept, and then after the proof of concept is running for a while, they come back and they say, no, you can't take it down, because if you do, then it's somehow going to negatively impact us. But I didn't hear a whole lot of discussion in there about security. Yep. Have you had any experience in this architecting? Or
Yeah, no, so that's actually a really interesting question, and it kind of leans back to something that Manny was talking about in terms of just the surface area of attack and those kinds of things. So the way that we think about these things is, imagine your whole enterprise was a building, okay? Now dunk it in water. Wherever the leaks get in, that's a vulnerability. That's how secure you really are. So you're looking for 1 million different leaks. And the challenge that we're seeing is, you know, there's been such a rapid transformation in the way that applications and services, the way that IT is done. It's fundamentally changing. If you think about just over the last decade, you've got, you know, the rise of the cloud platforms. You've got AWS, you've got Azure, you've got Google Cloud. You've got the rise of devices, mobile devices. Who's not carrying an iPhone or a Samsung or an Android or something like that? The way our surface area, we're moving back to a completely kind of disassembled environment or application architecture. So now you're starting to see things, and the pace of change is phenomenal. Now you're starting to see things like, you know, containers, microservices, service meshes, function as a service. No longer do I have to, you know, build an application by going, okay, I need a box, you know? Like, who needs a box nowadays? You know, now it's all virtual, none of it's real. You know, I don't need an operating system. I don't need an application server. I don't need any of that. I can write a few lines of code and publish it in application as a service or function as a service, and that can be an integral part of my overall environment. So just think about what that does to my surface area. You know, another good way to describe it is, it's really easy, or it's quite simple to kind of manage, you know, a dog. If I've got a dog, I've got him on the lead, I'm walking him, I've got him under control. Now imagine you have to manage all of the molecules that make up that dog. That's where we're going, okay? So everything is going to be decomposed. Applications and services are no longer one thing. I'm grabbing some data from a cloud service. I'm connecting to somebody else's mainframe and pulling some data off a database on the mainframe. I'm using a presentation layer that's, you know, hosted by a partner. I'm connecting that to a SaaS application. That's the world that we're moving into, okay? And security, these things are always exciting. You know, whenever I get a new toy, first thing I do is take it out of the box and I want to play with it, you know? And so that's what IT is. It's about that kind of excitement and adventure of exploring and playing with these new kinds of toys. But we have to keep reminding ourselves that now, you know, we have live data on mobile devices, real data, you know, PII, sensitive, secure data. You know, as soon as we start using a microservice, we have other microservices that are talking to that microservice. How are we going to control that? I mean, service mesh technology looks phenomenal. I think it's going to really take hold. You know, it's really useful. But how are you securing that? How are you ensuring that when a microservice gets stood up, it's meant to be in that mesh? It's meant to have access to that data. Yeah. So that's one of the challenges that we see is we kind of get excited. We run ahead with the technology as we should. You know, but I like to be the boring guy at the back reminding, you know, well, put your seatbelt on, don't text when you drive. Right. You know, it's all these things that we know, but we don't always think about. We need to think about how to secure that new environment. Because the new environment is here. It's happening. It's live. I guarantee you. You know, there are financial institutions that are already using service meshes in production. There are banks that have that data. You look at what's happening in the broader world around things like PSD2, which is a banking standard. And that's transferring. In the old days, the banks used to own your data. PSD2 is transferring that so that I now own my data. If I want to be a bank in Europe, I have to open a platform of APIs and let APIs access that banking data. Mm-hmm. How are you going to secure that? You know? So that's one of those challenges that we think about a lot, that we're looking at. We're looking at how do we step back? How do we look at that whole environment? As the environment's changing, how do we take it, stick it in a bucket of water, find the leaks, and plug them? And so there are a lot of kind of modern technologies, and that's where AI and machine learning, I mean, this is not something that a person can do because of the scale. When you're talking about an ephemeral environment that's spinning up and spinning down and self-controlling and, you know, forming new containers, you can't, you know, unless you've got a really clever guy that you could sit in the corner, you can't manage all of the security of that. Yeah. So you have to automate. You have to use AI. You have to use machine learning. You need security that secures itself. That's really one of those things that people need to think about as they start to explore the capabilities of new technology. Just have in your mind and just think about, how do I secure that?
So let's talk about that. Since we were discussing APIs just a few seconds ago, part of this has to do with automation, right? I mean, we said that. I think before we get to even machine learning, which is sort of an intuitive sort of thing, there is this thing that we can hold in our hand, this automation, but the bad guys have it too. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'd like to hear from each of you is, at this point, as it relates to automation, who's winning? And the reason I say that is because it's, as I said before, just as it's easy for me to spin up all these things inside the enterprise, it's just as easy for the bad guys to go out and build a very sophisticated attack surface. And now we have things like kitty scripts that will allow someone who doesn't even know what they're doing to go out, bring in a malicious piece of code, and just start firing it off at targets, just, if nothing else, for the thrill, much less the industrial hacker who's going to get in there to try to do some damage. So automation, friend or foe, what do you think?
Two things. Good friend of mine, he's actually the Deputy Technical Director for NSA for cyber operations. He put up a phrase a couple of weeks ago on Twitter: cyber is a double-edged sword. I want you to remember that. And you mentioned whatever we do, they're planning a counter, right? We come up with technology, and I mean, they say just like we do, hey, this is what they're doing. Their whole job is to get information, and you have to think about, this is what they're putting into place. How do we defeat it? How do we crack it? How do we go around it? How do we fool the technology that the friend is trying to put in? The other thing is, it's when you're looking at technology, whatever technology you put in place, the attacker will use it against you, or he will tweak it to do his thing. Like, think for a second, whatever you're using to look at critical events, are you 100% sure that it's telling you what is actually happening? You know, how is the data integrity, right? If you're using, I don't want to mention products, a SIEM, right? Is that what is actually happening, or the attacker is manipulating it? That can be done. So when you're looking at it, it's always I'm always planning, if we do this, how would I know that that is actually correct? So what Manny's thinking is always a plan B. That doesn't necessarily mean I need $1 million. Is if then, like a programmer, it's always that counter, because there's always a counter to what you do. And you know, when you're somebody who's always getting attacked, you got to have that in your head. So back and forth, right?
So how about from a mainframe viewpoint? Automation, what does that even mean?
Well, I guess from mainframe, a lot of people will have to rely on automation because nobody knows how to use the mainframe. But you know, the automation has good and bad points. Obviously, automation can make things can increase the volume, and we see denial of service attacks that are in the millions and millions of packets. That's all done through automation, and that's difficult to defend. But what's good about automation from a security perspective is that it represents a pattern. So if it's a pattern and you can see it, you can prevent it, and you can stop it at the front door, that's really good. The really difficult ones, and the ones that are probably the more serious bad actors, are those that are smart humans behind the scenes tricking and not using the patterns and not using automation and being very flexible and very crafty. Those are the bad guys. So. Yeah, so even on mainframe, but thankfully mainframe is often buried inside of the network, which is a good best practice, and we don't, at least no one announces whether their mainframe has been hacked, right? So for very good reasons.
So Jim, what does security and automation mean in an open environment? I mean, how do you, if I'm writing a Python script to do something, how do I secure a Python script, or does that even part of something?
Yeah, I mean, so I tend to agree with both Manny and Chip. And so my view of automation is it's not, is automation good or bad? It's, do you have good automation or do you have bad automation? Generally I'm a fan. I think, one of the challenges with security is often, and I hate to say it, it's human error, it's misconfiguration, it's somebody missing something, it's those kinds of things. They're great problems that automation can solve for you. You get that consistent pattern-based approach, those kinds of things. What I will say though is if you automate a bad process, you get the you get the benefit of the automation. You get to a really bad place much quicker and at scale. So it's not as automation is just a tool. What's important is how you use it. Good automation, I think, is critical, but I think you have to really, focus on the quality of it. And it's really about, don't just automate something because you can. I mean, I can automate anything. It's not a hard thing to do. But think about why you're automating and make sure that you're automating a good practice or a good process so that you're getting value out of that automation. From the bad side, from the bad actors side, generally speaking, people that, and here's where I would agree with Chip, generally people that use large-scale automation, I mean, we see denial of service attacks, distributed denial of service, those kinds of things, they tend to be automated. We see, we do a lot of security around payment transaction processing, for example. We tend to see a lot of, IP phones or IP devices that are trying to buy stuff that's fraudulent, those kinds of things. Automation, I think, is usually, it's kind of like, I'm going to just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see if anything sticks, if I can find one of those cracks, and then I'm going to hone in on it. So they don't tend to be the most sophisticated or the most complex attack vectors. So generally, automation is just a script kiddie, and there are a lot of tools that you can get nowadays that look at the behavior. I mean, we look at something, if we see, every 0.15 seconds something coming from an IP address or whatever, we know that it's automated. We can tell that. We can understand that today.
So I've heard a lot here about automation. I want to real quickly touch on the issue of AI and machine learning. For those of you, again, playing buzzword bingo, you can cross those off, right? You just got those two. But my question is, for as much as we're hearing about it, is it table stakes these days? For example, are we at a point yet, and do we understand AI and machine learning yet, where we're willing to commit to it, or put differently, our lack of using it is going to put us at a strategic disadvantage as it relates to security? What do y'all think?
I mean, I think any tool that enables you to, make a detection quicker, find out the anomalies and, the one-off, it's good. I'm not really sure if we're ready and whatever that means, because like I said, when you're looking at a particular technology, there was actually an article that I was reading a couple of weeks ago, how would you deal with malware that is now AI-enabled, right? So it learns by itself. So could that be possible? Yes. And at some point in time, we're just going to have to deal with it. So I think technology is absolutely great. It's indispensable. But there's always two sides to the equation. So if we do this, how do we mitigate it? That's always what I'm thinking. Yeah. We're doing this, what will be my counter?
Jim, I'll come to you, and then Chip, I'll give you the last one.
So on this one, I'm a big fan. I think it's critical as part of our path forward. And I think the problem with AI and ML is they're the new cool buzzwords. What does that mean? It's like, 10, 12 years ago, showing my age a little bit, the answer to everything was cloud. It didn't matter what it was. It's like, hey, did you eat my sandwich? Cloud. That was a valid answer. Like, it just didn't matter. And I think we're kind of in that phase of, today the answer is, well, AI, ML, obviously. Really? That's the answer to, would you like a sandwich? Yeah, sure. So I think that's the problem, is it's really understanding and defining it. But what I'll do is, think about what those concepts are. If I go back, 15 years ago when SIEM was a brand new thing, one of the big challenges with SIEM tools was false positives. Anybody who's ever worked in a SOC will know you got this brand new shiny thing, you turned it on, and then, oh my God, you got 75,000 alerts. And it was like, no, now I've got to sit there and go through them. And so SIEM tools started introducing concepts like baselining and trending. If I normally see 50,000 logins at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, then okay, that's fine. That's normal behavior. If I see 500,000, I'm way above my baseline. Well, isn't that some form of AI ML? So these concepts are not new. It's really defining where we use them. So in security, I think they're critical because I think they're an aid. Anything that gives us an advantage, anything where the system can look for patterns, anything where the system can learn patterns and can make suggestions, can adjust policy, those kinds of things. Anything that's an enabler to somebody like Manny, whose job is, I'm the security dude, I'm here to make sure nothing bad happens. I think AI/ML is going to be a huge service to him in the future.
Chip, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what Jim's saying. One of the misconceptions about AI or machine learning, I think, is that it's generic. But machine learning AI is extremely specific, very, very narrow in what it can do and provide. But it usually is a tool that we need because it actually solves problems we can't do in other ways. As Jim was talking about, could be user behavior where a user is doing something that's approved, but the motive is not. So for example, if you have a user ID and password, you log on at 8 o'clock in the morning every morning, that's fine. But maybe if you're logging on at 3 a.m. from China, there may be something up. Or perhaps you are doing your normal access to a particular database and doing maintenance, but instead of actually just doing maintenance, you're downloading large portions of that database that you've never done before. These are things that we can't do with our standard alerting tools or anything else, and even humans aren't very good at spotting that. But machine learning is pretty good at looking at normal versus abnormal. And so it's a good tool to have in the toolbox, but I don't think it's going to replace everything. I think it's just adding to the tool belt that we need in security.
Well, I'd like to thank the panelists. This has been a fast 30 minutes for me. I learned an awful lot here, and I appreciate y'all taking the time. I know it wasn't easy for y'all to get here, but I appreciate it, and I'm sure the audience appreciates it as well. So thank you very much for spending time.
Thank you, Chip. Appreciate it. Thank you.